Hello everyone. We were discussing about difference between objectivism and constructivism, wherein we saw a few points related to objectivism, which are nothing but the characteristics of that particular approach, and some points with regard to constructivism, which again characterizes what constructivism is all about, although we have seen various characteristics and various features of this particular concept of constructivism. And in the previous lecture, we discussed how objectivism is different from that of constructivism. And we also noted the difference in terms of the first criteria, that is knowledge, criterion, that is knowledge. Second was learning. Third was teacher's role. So we saw in terms of knowledge, in terms of learning, and in terms of the role of a teacher, how different is objectivism from that of constructivism. Moving ahead, let us focus on student's role. So we'll see here how different is student's role in constructivist classroom from that of objectivist classroom. So under objectivism, as you can read, learner is considered to be a passive learner and he or she is always a learner. So passive learner or passive listener, okay, is a concept wherein a student is not allowed or sometimes doesn't feel encouraged or motivated to participate. So when there is only one-way traffic that is coming from the teacher to the student, that's where the student's role turns out to be or enters into a passive zone because the student is not actively involved in the learning. And under constructivism, we can see that here the student is considered as the center of the teaching learning process. So when we talk or when we take students and keep that child as at the center of the teaching and learning process, it is ultimately going to be a very active interaction because you are thinking about the child all the time. You are thinking about whether the child has understood the concept that you are teaching, and you also make sure that they are enjoying the process of learning. So this is how different it becomes when you keep the child at the center instead of considering the learner as a passive listener or only listener, which again converts the interaction into a passive or maybe a passive interaction. It's one-way traffic. There is no life in the class. There is no interaction that's happening because here only the teacher is talking continuously and there is no role of a child in the teaching learning process, which is not so in constructivism because your teacher is considering the child's interest, considering the child's motivation, considering the child's readiness for the lecture, and then plans the entire lecture, keeping the child at the center of the process. And the teacher is a collaborator and sometimes an expert. Kindly read this at end. So teacher is a collaborator. So why collaborator? Because a teacher is working on a given concept which he or she has planned for the day in collaboration with the students. Because students are given equal importance along with him or her to conduct the classroom. Because if you are going with constructivist approach as your approach of teaching and learning, then you are dependent on the children's we can say contribution to your lecture. So in a way you collaborate with the students so that it makes your classroom more interactive and sometimes an expert. So we know that teacher is supposed to be someone who is more knowledgeable, or what we call it in a technical term as MKO, that is more knowledgeable rather. So the teacher is expected to be an expert because sometimes it so happens that while you're collaborating, there are certain instances which the students might come across or certain circumstances wherein the students would need you as an expert. So you need to read something extra or something more about a given concept before you enter the class, as they might need your assistance in the process of learning. So it's very important that you also play the role of an expert whenever needed. Now, after students' role, let us see how that instructional emphasis, which is the next criterion, differentiates constructivism from that of objectivism. So under objectivism, we can see that instruction is given about facts and emphasis is laid on the memorization, and the learner are expected to replicate the content and structure in their thinking. So if you focus on few terms which are mentioned in this statement, that is, the instruction is about the facts and emphasis is on the memorization, and it believes in replicating the content and the structure, okay, of their thinking. So they are supposed to replicate whatever the teacher says or does in the classroom. So whenever an instruction, when we talk about instructional emphasis, so the instructions are mostly about the facts. So if you're talking about any given concept in the subject of science, for that matter, food web, objectivist classroom would talk about food web in a way which would only let the students know what exactly is the meaning of food web and whatever content that is covered in the textbook. Okay, so the teacher is only imparting facts to the students, and the teacher in a way emphasizes on how well they have to memorize the food web or maybe the definition or the explanation of that given concept. And sometimes replicating the content is what focused on, and in a way it is making them think. Okay, that's what the structure in them thinking. So it is a way of making them think in a particular manner which the teacher has designed for herself or himself. So it is more of what you call teaching the child how to think or how to learn, what to learn, and not giving them that freedom of learning a concept without memorizing the facts or without imparting them the information about the facts which are mentioned in the textbook. And it is considered to be, it is universal and imposed on the learner. So it is very much clear that it is something which the teacher imposes on the child, that this is what they have to learn and this is how they have to write and this is how they have to think. Okay, so this is how a this is how an objectivist approach would be. And when we think of a constructivist approach, we can see that the emphasis here is laid on understanding the relationships existing between knowledge and the external world. So here the emphasis is on the understanding, and here the emphasis is on memorization. So it is very clear that understanding is given more importance or emphasis when we talk about constructivism, and the overall aim or objective of teaching and learning process that happens in a constructivist classroom would be based on relating their knowledge, what they have of the concept, what we call it a previous knowledge, whatever previous knowledge that they have about a given concept to the external world. So in a way, the teacher would give them some illustrations or examples which can help them relate. Say suppose we can take the example of the same concept, that is the food web or maybe food chain. So instead of only teaching them the content which is given in the textbook, if we try and link those concepts with what they see around them, or maybe something, or maybe you can choose to show them a video which is somewhat similar to the real world they live in, so that they'll be in a better position to relate the knowledge or the content in the textbook to the external world of which they are a part of. So it's very important to do that. And students are guided through inquiry and discovery. So inquiry is something, it is a process which is very scientific and it involves a lot of work at the end of the lecture. But for now, although we'll be studying about inquiry training model in the upcoming lectures, for now we can just make sense of this particular word as an inquiry, wherein the teacher would ask the students to learn the concept by exploring the facts on their own instead of just teaching them in the classroom. So there are various steps and various levels the students have to cross in order to reach to that particular knowledge or information which they would get at the end of the inquiry process. So here the guidance is given by the teacher to the students in order to get knowledge, or the instruction uh, would be like this, wherein you don't teach them or you don't impose on them something. Instead, they are given the freedom to learn on their own, and your job as a teacher is only to provide them the circumstances, or only to provide them with the examples or illustrations which could help them understand or make sense of what is presented to them. So this is how we can differentiate objectivism and constructivism on the basis of instructional emphasis. Moving ahead, instruction here is negotiable and jointly defined by the learners and teachers. So if you see in the objectivist approach in terms of instructional emphasis, we know that the teacher is the whole and soul of the classroom, and students hardly have any role to play. That's why they are considered to be a passive listeners. But here the discussion or instructions would be something which involves the students as well as the teachers, because it is an interactive process, and constructivism believes in interaction. It believes in more of conversation between the teacher and the pupil. So it focuses on negotiation, it focuses on jointly defining the process, or we can call it as instruction. So this is how we can look at both the approaches in terms of instructional emphasis. Then the next point is demonstration process. Now it is the next criteria on the basis of which we would differentiate objectivism and constructivism. So if we see under objectivism, learning is successful when students can repeat what was taught, and it focuses more on quantity than that of quality. Now when I talk about demonstration process, it is about how would we expect, as a teacher, how would I expect my children in the school to replicate whatever that is taught, or how would I expect them to demonstrate what they have learned during the classroom. So what approach would a teacher choose in an objectivist classroom in order for them to demonstrate what they have learned? That's why the term demonstration process is used, which is one of the criteria. So in objectivism, learning is successful when students can repeat what was taught. So if the students are able to tell what exactly was taught in the classroom, it is considered that learning has occurred. And the focus is more on the quantity. So how much the child can replicate, or maybe we can say how much the child can repeat what teacher just said or what teacher summarized in the classroom, is given more importance to than how much they have understood, which is again linked to the quality. Okay, we can memorize a particular concept, but memorization doesn't give us that assurance that it is been understood by the child. So the focus in the objectivist classroom is not on the quality, instead it is on the quantity. So we would look at the amount of information that is retained by the child and not the amount which is understood. So it is very important to make a sense of this particular concept of demonstration process here when we talk about the difference between objectivism and constructivism. Now under constructivism, we can see that learning is considered to be successful when students can demonstrate conceptual understanding. So as I said, the focus is on understanding and not on the memorization. And here quality of understanding is given importance, which is not there in an objectivist classroom. So what they have understood, how much they have understood, instead of how much they have retained or how much they can memorize or how much information they could replicate or repeat, is given importance. So quality plays a very important role when we talk about constructivism, which is not with objectivism. So these were some of the points which differentiates objectivism and constructivism. We'll discuss more about it in our next class. Thank you.